from your local election headquarters. This is a 22 News InFocus election special with candidates for governor and lieutenant governor. And now, here's Rich Teddemer.
Good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of 22 News in Focus. I'm Rich Teddemer. 22 News continues to be your election headquarters by providing information about the federal midterm elections as well as this year's election of all the Commonwealth's constitutional offices and ballot questions. On today's program, we'll be talking with the candidates running for Massachusetts governor and lieutenant governor who will be facing off in the primary election on Tuesday, September 6th. We invited Democratic candidate for governor Maura Healey, but she was unable to take part in the program due to scheduling conflicts. But joining us in studio is Chris Doty. He is a Republican running for governor. Chris is a businessman from Rentham. Chris, thanks very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Well, it's great to be here, Rich.
Your first run for public office, and you're going right for the top, going for the governor's.
Well, it's a perfect fit for someone that comes from the executive world like I have. It's very common in Massachusetts, like a Mitt Romney who comes from the business world to come over to the executive office. And we look for that in a governor, someone that comes from the private sector that's created jobs, which is a big part of being governor.
Yeah, talk about that. Why should people be picking you as opposed to Jeff Deal on Tuesday?
Well, a couple of things. One is I'm a job creator, and that's the one thing we all look at for our governors, is someone that can create jobs. You know, if you looked at a job description of a governor, the thing you would look for most is someone that can make sure the economy is strong and then it's booming. And that's been for 30 years I've been creating jobs here. I've probably hired over 1,000 Bay Staters here, and so I come in with that background. The second thing is that I want to fix the affordability problems in Massachusetts. It's so expensive to live here. And I've been making affordable auto parts for GM, Ford, Chrysler for 3 decades. So I know how to make things affordable. So it makes me, and I'm comfortable with budgets. I'm comfortable with, large, complex debt issues, with hiring and firing and those types of things I'm prepared for.
Let's talk fiscal right now. You talked about how expensive it is to live here. The state has ended the fiscal year with a substantial surplus, and the rainy day fund is at historic levels. As governor, what would you do to keep the state finances healthy and while also providing some relief to taxpayers?
So many states across America have a huge surplus. We're actually not unusual in that regard. We have a $3.5 billion surplus, and it's growing every month. What the other states are doing is beginning to lower taxes. In fact, most states, over 30 in America, have already lowered taxes significantly. Our state to the north, New Hampshire, they've had 10 tax reductions so far. So as day one, I want to start lowering our taxes and getting money back into people's pockets. That's what we should be doing, because we don't need all that excess surplus money sitting in the State House. We need to start giving it back.
Why doesn't it ever come back? It never comes back, it seems like.
It seems that way, and it should be a bit frustrating for everyone in Massachusetts that it seems like our legislature is just addicted to our tax dollars when they have this enormous surplus, and they don't want to give it back. So that's something we've got to work on in our state, is start bringing down the cost of living here. And there are many structural issues we need to work on, but certainly lowering taxes to get money back into people's pockets. I really want to work on sales tax. I want to bring that down. Property taxes. We have some of the highest property taxes in the country, and I want to start bringing that down so that people, senior citizens, can stay in their home, people can afford their lives, and so we need to start working on that on day one.
The Supreme Court recently overturned Roe v. Wade, essentially allowing each state to decide whether abortion remains legal there. Massachusetts recently strengthened laws protecting that as abortion rights. Would you support any further changes to either expand or restrict abortion access here in Massachusetts?
No, it's codified into law. The abortions are safe and legal here, and I'm not seeking to change that in any way. That's not why I'm running. I'm running really on a strong economy, making it affordable here, and reducing our taxes, and also keeping a balance in the State House. Those are the things that really caused me to run.
Mm-hmm. Also, the state legislature this year voted to make undocumented immigrants eligible for driver's licenses. There's now an effort on a ballot question to repeal that. Should the state allow undocumented immigrants to obtain driver's licenses? Why or why not?
I think it's bad policy, actually, for us to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. I think it makes it so that we become too attractive compared to other states in America. Let me give you an example of what our sister Commonwealth in Virginia did. They passed a similar legislation, but they had 2 requirements, and they're both interesting to think about. One requirement was to get a driver's license, you had to have a job, a W-2, and you had to show evidence that you were actually contributing to the economy. That makes sense to me, The second one is this. They said that the driver's license would look different. It would different color, different orientation to protect the voting rights of the citizens. It is my belief that when you become a full-fledged citizen in America, you should have the right to vote, and that should be you should have a normal driver's license for that. Now, I am in full support of legal immigration. In fact, I have a factory in Rentham with 300 people, most of which are immigrants. We need more immigrants, and I want to do everything I can as governor to open up the gates for legal immigration into our country. We should welcome it with we should welcome all of them with a welcoming mat.
Wow. We have totally run out of time, unfortunately. We could talk for a while longer, I think. Thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to Tuesday and September 6th.
Thank you, Rich.
Our next guest is Jeff Deal, who is a Republican candidate for governor. Jeff, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rich. I appreciate that.
Jeff was a longtime member of the State House from 2011 to 2019, and he also unsuccessfully challenged U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren back when, but now he's running for governor, hoping to win that Republican nomination. Let's start off by this real easy one. Why should Republican voters in Massachusetts choose you over your primary opponent, Chris Doty?
Well, first of all, I ran for the state legislature as a small business owner who was frustrated with Beacon Hill, and basically that I felt like in my town we weren't getting what we needed for our schools. I ran against the vice chair of education in the House, and I was on the finance committee in the town of Whitman. So I just wanted to run to make my town better. I'm an Eagle Scout. I believe in making the campground better than you found it. So that was my goal, was just to go to Beacon Hill and try to make a difference there for my town that I lived in. And then, of course, the other two towns I would represent, which was Abington and East Bridgewater. I live in the town of Whitman. But once I was in the legislature, obviously, I found that there was a lot more challenges that we needed to work on. In 2014, I led the repeal of the indexing of our state's gas tax to inflation. I felt it was the most regressive tax that would have affected people, middle to low income families the most. And I also felt that the state had plenty of revenue to handle transportation issues. So we led the repeal effort, and I was successful in 2014. And as you mentioned, I ran in 2018 for U.S. Senate against Elizabeth Warren. However, even though we didn't win that race, I got almost 1 million votes, more than the Democratic nominee for governor. And so it was a good chance to get to know the entire state of Massachusetts. I really feel like between my experience in the private sector and also my experience serving in the legislature, I'm best suited to serve now for Massachusetts to lead us out of the pandemic and out of a lot of the, the economic issues that still face our country and our nation right now.
Yeah, and being in the State House that long, you know how it all works on Beacon Hill. And the state ended the fiscal year with a substantial surplus, and the rainy day fund is at historic levels. As governor, what would you do to keep state finances healthy while also providing some relief to taxpayers?
Yeah, so state finances are incredibly healthy. As you mentioned, $5 billion in excess tax revenue. That's on top of $5 billion that the federal government gave our state for pandemic relief. And unfortunately, $4 billion of that pandemic relief was spent on pet projects. The town of Beverly, for example, got a pickleball court for $200,000. I thought that could have been given back to small businesses who were hit with a new fee for unemployment. We depleted $7 billion in unemployment. And instead of taking a lot of that $5 billion of federal relief and putting it into restoring our unemployment insurance trust fund, they spent it elsewhere. So small businesses were closed. If they survived that, employees were given enhanced unemployment to stay home. If they survived, being able to bring workers back to their company, they are now being hit with additional fees. That's one thing I think we should be taking a look at, is helping those small businesses. The other thing I'd like to do is give people, I think we need to cut the excise tax. We've had that since the Korean War. It's a tax that doesn't make any sense. You buy a new car, you're already paying a sales tax on it. And then the next year you get a hefty bill of $600, $700, $800. If we want people to get into more fuel efficient cars and try to get more, green initiatives going, I think getting rid of the excise tax with all the revenue that we have in the state right now, that would be a logical way to help the actual people who have to commute every single day. And it would help middle to low income families that can't necessarily afford to get into more expensive vehicles by cutting that excise tax.
Finally, somebody who doesn't like the excise tax. I like that. Also be careful about pickleball. There are people who really like that as well. So
I know they love pickleball, but you know what? A town or a senior center can have that built. It's not up to the state and the pandemic funds to fix that.
That's true. More serious topic here. The Supreme Court recently overturned Roe v. Wade, essentially allowing each state to decide whether abortion remains legal there. Massachusetts recently strengthened its laws protecting abortion rights. Would you support any further changes to either expand or restrict abortion access here in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so I thought the Supreme Court did the right thing. It's always, in my opinion, should have been a states' rights issue. In fact, I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, agreed that that decision really should have been left to the states. Massachusetts, as everybody I think knows, passed the Roe Act in advance of that Dobbs decision that struck down Roe v. Wade. So Massachusetts has codified abortion rights in our state's law. As governor, I don't make law, I execute law. So the legislature right now is composed of people who wanted to protect abortion rights. My personal feeling is I want to protect life where we can. And I agree with Governor Baker that there were elements of the Roe Act that were extreme. I think that allowing a baby that survives an abortion to die on the operating table is extreme. You know, it's something that I would like to see reversed. And so, you know, there are elements I think that we could look at, but I understand as well that in this state, people's healthcare rights are protected there. But also at the same time, I think healthcare rights like vaccine, the decision to decide whether you should get vaccinated should also be your personal healthcare choice. And the state forced that on people. I think that was wrong. I'm going to rehire on day one any state worker that was fired because of the vaccine mandate. And on day two, I'm going to replace anybody in state government that thought that was good policy.
Oh, just real quickly, we have just a limited time left, Jeff. The legislature voted this year to make undocumented immigrants eligible for driver's licenses. There's now an effort on the ballot question to repeal this law. Should the state allow undocumented immigrants to obtain driver's licenses? Why or why not?
So first of all, I want to see immigrants come here and become citizens as soon as possible. I filed language when I was in the legislature to try to make that possible. But the fact of the matter is, doing a workaround by giving people who are here illegally a driver's license provides them an ID that could be used around the rest of the country for whatever purposes they want. And then on top of that, it's going to be handled by the RMV in Massachusetts. Our RMV has been notoriously unable to process out-of-state violations, which led to the death of 7 Marines by a driver that should not have had his license. We've also seen in the Brockton division 2,000 licenses given to people without taking a test. So there's some issues with the RMV being the oversight for that. And then a 2020 law, it passed by the legislature, also allows people to be automatically enrolled to vote if they get a Massachusetts driver's license. And that really creates an elections problem that even Governor Baker said was the reason why he vetoed giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. And the legislature, of course, overrode them. So I'm hoping the ballot question is successful.
Well, Jeff, we're running out of time. I really appreciate you joining us today. Of course, the primary day coming up on Tuesday, September 6th. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich. I appreciate it.
All right, Jeff Deal, the Republican nominee for governor. And coming right back, we will meet some of the candidates running for lieutenant governor. You're watching 22 News in Focus.
From your local election headquarters, you're watching the 22 News in Focus election special. Once again, here's Rich Teddemer.
Welcome back to the special election edition of 22 News in Focus. We just heard from the 2 Republican candidates for governor and their plans for the state's future should they win the corner office at the State House. Joining me now is Dr. Tammy Govea, who is running for lieutenant governor as a Democrat. Tammy, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
A graduate of Mount Holyoke College,
That's
also
right.
got your master's at BU, so you know the area at least well.
I do, yeah. Been
Yeah.
across the state, living and working in different parts of the state throughout my career.
And also you are representing the 14th Middlesex District in the State House, so you have, you know what's going on there in Beacon Hill. Why should the voters of Massachusetts choose you to be the next lieutenant governor?
Yeah, you know, I got into this race 15 months ago because I have seen throughout my own personal life and as a state representative and as a doctor of public health, how often state government is leaving hardworking families behind every single day. You know, it's getting harder for folks to be able to afford sending their kids to college, making sure that they have a roof over their head, accessing mental health services and human services and childcare. These are really big issues for us to tackle. It's why I got into this race and really have been crisscrossing the state and hearing about these issues. As a doctor of public health and as a social worker for 25 years, I can get to work on day one, working to address the root causes of some of these big issues.
You know as lieutenant governor that you have specific responsibilities, but serve whatever role the governor envisions you to have. If you are elected, what would you hope you'll be responsible for as Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Governor's Council and really focus in on criminal justice reform and making sure that we are appointing judges who understand the role that childhood trauma and poverty and racism play in our criminal legal system. And then beyond that, I do have a vision for the work that I want to take on, forming 5 working groups to tackle COVID response and recovery, climate change, mental health and human services, the housing crisis, and of course the child care crisis. Because what I have seen is we need to really invest in our people if we want to make sure that our families are able to thrive in the Commonwealth and that we're able to keep our economy on track once we get it back on track.
You mentioned the Governor's Council, which votes on judicial nominees. What do you bring to that role?
Yeah, again, my facilitative leadership throughout my career, really forming various coalitions and working groups and working in that kind of collaborative space. But as the chair, I have that kind of skill set, and then having an eye towards, well, who are the kinds of judges, who are the kinds of parole board members that we want to appoint, and making sure that it's really aligning with progressive values here in Massachusetts so that we're moving towards, again, criminal justice reform, which is some of the legislation that has been taken up at the State House over the last couple sessions.
So you went to school here at Mount Holyoke College, so you know about Western Massachusetts, and you know that sometimes Western Massachusetts residents feel like we're being neglected here.
Absolutely,
from the eastern
yes.
part of the state. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to make sure that the voices of Western Massachusetts residents are heard and that our local economy grows?
Yeah, when I first announced that I was running, it was in June of last year. The first place I came was Western Mass, spending time here, really hearing what the issues are. But what I'm noticing is that there really is a universality in a lot of the issues that we need to tackle. Getting tax relief, getting money right back into the pockets of our hardworking people, providing rental assistance and rent relief, and rental deductions, the increase in the earned income tax credit. We know that we didn't, in the legislature, tackle that in the economic development package. It still is lingering. I am calling for us to get back into session to get that passed. And as Lieutenant Governor, keeping an eye towards making sure we are investing in our families. I'm really deeply concerned about mental health and human services, child care in particular. Those are issues that are keeping people out of being able to get back into the workforce. That impacts our municipalities, it impacts our schools, it impacts our law enforcement agencies, it impacts every single sector across the Commonwealth. And that does definitely impact folks here in Western Mass who didn't even really come out of the 2008 recession. Then we get hit with COVID and all the financial impacts that have resulted from the global pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned going back to school. Kids came back to school, and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education has recently raised the score for 10th graders to pass the MCAS test. Do you support this decision, and what are your thoughts on the use of standardized tests as a graduation requirement?
I've been very vocal in my opposition to using MCAS as a high-stakes test for graduation. We know that there's a lot of flaws and a lot of bias in those tests. They don't really measure what students' capacity for learning really is. We know that teachers, unfortunately, do feel compelled to teach to the test to make sure that their students do pass. But that doesn't mean that our students understand critical thinking or systems thinking or the skills that they will need to be able to make it in the future of work that we are really engaged in here in a knowledge economy. So I don't support raising the standards in that MCAS, what Bessie had decided a week ago.
Mm-hmm. The MBTA had to shut down the Orange Line and part of the Green Line for a month for long-needed repairs. What do you think needs to be done to fix the T? And what do you say to people in Western Massachusetts who are worried about the high cost of fixing the T?
Well, I love that you asked about education and then transportation right after that, because really what we need to do is pass the Fair Share Amendment in November, which will allow us to have more dollars to invest in our public transportation system as well as our educational system. And when it comes to transportation, we need to connect the whole state. I do support East-West Rail, North-South Rail Link, and other rail links. I also support making our regional transit authorities free without means testing, as well as the subway, to make sure that we are creating opportunities for folks to be able to really use public transportation as a public good.
We got a chance to talk on some of the hot button issues right now, and of course Election Day, primary day, is coming up on Tuesday. Tammy Govea, thanks for joining us, running for Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much, appreciate it.
After the break, our conversations continue with two more Democratic candidates running for Lieutenant Governor, Eric Lesser and Kim Driscoll. You're watching 22 News in Focus.
From your local election headquarters, you're watching a 22 News in Focus election special. Once again, here's Rich Tedimer.
You're watching a special election edition of 22 News in Focus. My guest right now, a familiar face to voters in Western Massachusetts, Democratic State Senator Eric Lesser, running for Lieutenant Governor. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
Thank you. Of course, Senator Lesser represents the 1st Hampden and Hampshire District. We know you well around here. Why should the voters choose you to be their next Lieutenant Governor?
Well, thanks for having me, Rich, and there's a very important election coming up on Tuesday, of course. I'm the only candidate on the Democratic side for any office who's from outside 495, from Central or Western Mass. I think we know, Rich, how important it is for our region to have a strong voice, a seat at the table. We've got to get the job done on West-East Rail. We've got to continue to build out our manufacturing sector, close the wait lists at our Voc schools, and we've got to do a lot more to help support our schools in Western Mass that we know struggle to keep pace with the schools and the opportunities in Eastern Mass.
As Lieutenant Governor, you have a few specific constitutional duties, but also you serve whatever kind of role the governor envisions for you. If elected, what would you hope to be responsible for as Lieutenant Governor?
Well, certainly on day one, I want to get working on implementing West-East Rail, right? We've got to connect Pittsfield, Springfield, Worcester, Boston by rail. We've been working on that, Rich, as you know, for 8 years. The money is waiting for us in the Biden infrastructure plan. We got to get the ducks in a row on a state level to get that money into the state and the shovels in the ground. That's going to be a key thing that I really want to focus on. Another thing I just want to really work on and help support Governor Healy on is giving voice to the regions of our Commonwealth. I think we know that the default is often for us in Western and Central Mass, to be left out, to be left behind. We need that strong voice right up there at the State House on a statewide level, speaking to our issues, speaking to our needs.
You mentioned some of the duties as Lieutenant Governor. One of them is presiding over the Governor's Council, which votes on judicial nominees. What would you bring to that role?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking, Rich. That is a very important part of the Lieutenant Governor's job, to, of course, help chair the body that confirms all judges nominated by the Governor. I think I've got the skills and the expertise to do that. When I worked for President Obama, I worked on 2 Supreme Court nominations for Elena Kagan and for Sonia Sotomayor. I'm currently the vice chair of our Judiciary Committee. I'm an attorney that's worked on 3 major criminal justice reform packages over the last 6-7 years. And I think it's time for us to really reinvigorate that council and work to appoint more diverse judges of every type, Rich. We need more women, we need more minorities serving as judges. We also need regional diversity, and you appreciate this. People watching from Western Mass understand this. There was a period of time when the SJC, the most senior court in the Commonwealth, didn't have a single person from Western Massachusetts. That's not fair. That's something I'm going to work to change as chair of the Governor's Council.
Speaking of that, and you talked about a seat at the table for Western Massachusetts residents. Oftentimes we feel left out by the economic prosperity in the East. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to make sure those voices from Western Mass are heard, and how that makes our local economy grow?
Well, first, I'm the hometown person. I'm from Western Mass. I've represented Western Mass in the state Senate for 8 years. So I'll be there, to make sure that Western Mass getting its attention and the focus it deserves. But, a couple things. It's about elevating our issues. We know we have got to get the rail done. We need that connection. We need that link to the red-hot economy in Boston. We know, for example, that we've got a lot of work to do to help reinvigorate our manufacturing sector, closing the wait lists at vocational schools, helping make sure that our great Voc schools across the Pioneer Valley are getting the support they need. Tourism, arts, cultural funding, so important, supporting our museums, supporting our tourist economy. We've got a lot of agriculture in Western Mass. I want to make sure that our agricultural and food policy is really at the center of the conversation. And it's also about making sure that the officials and the appointments in state government reflect geographic diversity, right? We want to make sure that there's cabinet secretaries from Western Mass, that there's officials appointed in the government agencies from Western Mass. It's important to give that perspective.
Let's talk. Kids just went back to school, of
Yeah.
course, and the Board of Elementary and Secondary
My
Education.
kids just went back to
That's
school,
right, your
yeah.
kids, the very young age, right?
Yeah, exactly. A fourth grader, a kindergartner.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's so much fun.
It is fun, yeah.
Let's
a
talk.
lot of work, but it's fun,
Oh,
too.
it is. It is. Now, the MCAS has been changed
Yeah.
slightly. They just raised the score for the 10th graders to pass the MCAS. Do you support that decision?
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on using standardized testing as a graduation requirement?
I don't think that that's appropriate right now, especially coming out of COVID. The disruptions our students, anybody who's a parent, a grandparent knows how hard this time has been for our young people. I don't think it was the right move right now to raise that graduation requirement. I think rather what we need to be focusing on is more support for mental health services at our schools. We know teachers are burned out. We need more support for our teachers. There's shortages at almost every school in Western Mass, available positions going unfilled. We've got a lot of work to do. As Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to really work to support our public schools, get more support for social and emotional support, guidance counselors, folks to help with the mental health challenges, and really importantly, more art, more music, more PE, just things that will help kids, learn to be good citizens and good members of society. We need standards, Rich. I'm not saying, do away with all of it, but raising the requirement right now, after the disruptions our schools have been through, to me feels a little out of touch.
That's a good point. And,
Yeah.
with the pandemic, it's been so hard to make these adjustments.
Exactly.
You're right. Maybe that is one that we really should have done. We're out of time right now, unfortunately.
That went fast.
I told you. It goes by super fast.
Yeah.
But we really appreciate you joining us, Senator Eric Lesser, running for Lieutenant Governor. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you.
Our next candidate is Kim Driscoll, the current mayor of Salem, who is also running as a Democrat for Lieutenant Governor. Kim, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this. You've been mayor of Salem for 16 years, and now you want to be Lieutenant Governor. Tell us why the voters should select you as Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I've been blessed to be leading my city, the city of Salem, for the last 16 years. Prior to that, I worked in the city of Chelsea as they were coming out of receivership. Really taught me the value of good government and who pays the price when there are failures in leadership. As a mayor, I've been leading on the ground in the trenches, from COVID response and recovery, tackling housing issues, trying to strengthen our public schools, working to address transportation woes. And I want to take that experience, that executive know-how, and put it to work as Lieutenant Governor. So often when you're in the trenches as a local leader, you don't really feel like you have a strong state partner. I hope in this role to be able to take the experience from what I call the get stuff done wing of government, bring it to bear to help communities. The key to the Commonwealth's success will be thriving cities and towns, and I want to be able to work on that as Lieutenant Governor.
Okay, as Lieutenant Governor, you have a few constitutional responsibilities, but serve whatever role that the governor envisions for that person. If you are elected, what would you hope to be responsible for as Lieutenant Governor?
What we've seen out of the Lieutenant Governor candidate for the most part is really being a key liaison and partner to our cities and towns. In addition to chairing the Governor's Council, as you mentioned, you also chair the Local Government Advisory Council. I think it's a significant role, knowing that we need our communities to be healthy, we need them to be thriving. The number one thing I'm hearing about when I, go across this Commonwealth, and I've been grateful to be able to spend some time getting to as many cities and towns as possible, is housing being a real challenge. Even in places where housing is more affordable, it's not more affordable to the people living there. I hope to be able to lean into the housing issue. As the mayor of Salem, I know housing is key to the social determinants of health. We're a community where you used to be able to pour coffee or pour beer for a living and put a roof over your head, and now people are really challenged. Anyone in the service sector, anyone who gives you anything over a counter, to be able to live in the community that you work is becoming much more difficult. And we already know the high cost of housing contributes to folks being more food insecure, not having enough resources, to pay for gas and utilities. This is a place where we have a huge housing shortage. We need to work together at the state level and at the local level to attack it.
It hasn't been easy recently, no doubt about that.
Oof.
And you mentioned Governor's Council. Lieutenant Governor would be presiding over the Governor's Council, which votes on judicial nominees. What would you bring to that role?
As an attorney who worked for the city of Chelsea as their chief legal counsel, and certainly someone who's been involved in local government, I know the importance of having judiciary officers, both judges, clerk of courts, other positions that really reflect our community's profile. So I hope as Governor's Council I'll bring some order. The Governor's Council hasn't always operated in the most open and transparent way. I often say it's the most important board or commission that no one's ever heard of. We want to do something about that. Let's make sure the Governor's Council meetings are open, transparent, that we're being constructive constructive in unlocking the potential for folks who live and work in our Commonwealth to apply for those positions, and then make sure they're reflective of what our Commonwealth profile looks like. That's not just talking about your typical demographics, but that lived experience. You know, do we have enough defense counsel? Do we have enough prosecutors? How do we think about the work that we're doing on the Governor's Council from the perspective of pardons, you know, when it comes to redemption? I think there's work we can do to sort of professionalize our operations and make sure people understand the Governor's Council and the critical role it plays, knowing that the Supreme Court is pushing so many, you know, of the what I consider to be fundamental freedoms back to states. It's going to be more important than ever that we have a judiciary that's well represented, going through a professional process, and that residents can see how those positions are filled.
As a mayor in Eastern Massachusetts and Salem, you should know that Western Massachusetts residents oftentimes feel left out of the economic prosperity that happens in the East. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to make sure that the voices of Western Massachusetts residents are heard and that the local economy grows here?
You know, I'm so glad you asked that question, because when you're a mayor, you have this lived experience on the ground. And many of the cities and towns that are in Western Mass have similar circumstances and challenges to what I'm facing on the ground locally. I'm pleased to have the support of a number of local leaders, several local mayors, local school committee members, local city councilors, local elected officials at the state level, because I think they realize I bring the type of experience. You don't have to be from Western Mass to really appreciate both the opportunities and the challenges here. And for sure, we have some work to do to make up for how we partition out resources in this state. Currently, when we think about the Chapter 90 formula that funds roads and sidewalks, the Chapter 70 formula that funds schools, with declining enrollment, and frankly with large geographic areas that don't have the same population, these formulas don't work in Western Mass. I hope to be a strong state partner, not just for you know, my hometown, but for all hometowns. When you work in local government, you know the challenges and you want to be that, not just partner, but strategic ally. So I'm looking forward to partnering with community members here, grateful for the support I have of mayors, of state elected officials in Western Mass. And we spent a lot of time here because I wanted to purposely make sure I had a full grounding of what's happening on, you know, in the neighborhoods here, and make sure we had solutions that will fit a Western Mass geography.
We have about 30 seconds left. I'm just going to question, a quick answer. The Board of Elementary and Secondary Education just raised the MCAS exam, the rates higher. Do you support that decision, and what are your thoughts on the use of standardized testing as a graduation requirement?
You know, I'm the chair of the Salem School Committee. As a gateway city, we know that there's work to do on this MCAS test to make sure it's actually delivering on accountability, but making sure that we're thinking about the different needs of our students. I didn't think this was the perfect time to do it, but I understand why they did it.
Wow, that went fast, huh?
You told me fast.
You did very well. We appreciate it. Kim Driscoll, thanks very much, running for Lieutenant Governor. Thank you. And our next guest is the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor. It's Kate Campanelli, and we'll have that interview when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus.
From your local election headquarters, you're watching the 22 News in Focus election special. Once again, here's Rich Teddemer.
Our next guest is a Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Kate Campanelli, and as we return right here, she is actually running she's a member of the State House actually for 2 terms. She was there for 4 years in the 17th Worcester District. Now she's, as I said, the Republican candidate running for Lieutenant Governor. Kate, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be out here.
Yeah. Why should the voters of Massachusetts pick you as their next Lieutenant Governor?
Sure. Well, you know, it's my broad range of experience. I come with 12 years of public service experience to the ticket, with running informally with Chris Stody, who's running for governor. And my experience, I started in the federal government as a legislative staffer for a federal agency. I moved back home here to Massachusetts and got involved in local and state government and politics, and ran myself in 2014 at the age of 28 for state representative. So I represented the city of Worcester and my hometown of Leicester, and as a freshman served 4 years on the budgeting committee, Ways and Means. I offered a first in the nation student loan bill, incentive repayment bill, and really proud of my accomplishments there. In 2018, when I left the House, I was a teacher in our public schools for a few years before running for Lieutenant Governor. So my experience I bring to the ticket.
So you have experience in the classroom and also on Beacon Hill.
Yes.
So you've got that down. Now, you know, as Lieutenant Governor, you have a few specific constitutional responsibilities, but will serve whatever role the governor envisions for you. If you are elected, what would you hope you would be responsible for as lieutenant governor?
Sure. Other than the statutory requirements, we see my role as really a partnership with the governor and really continuing the tradition of being a liaison to the cities and towns and municipalities across Massachusetts. I think that's traditionally worked really well. So we'd like to continue that tradition. And also, one thing that's found us on the campaign trail is tourism. We found that tourism has really declined here in Massachusetts, and Chris and I have talked about putting me as the chair of tourism in Massachusetts to make sure that Massachusetts returns to the top 5 where it should be. We have so much to offer here in Massachusetts, and out here in Western Mass we have the Berkshires, you have arts that are thriving, you have so much history here with the Basketball Hall of Fame, the Norman Rockwell Museum. So we really just want to make Massachusetts a tourist destination spot again.
As you know, one of the responsibilities for Lieutenant Governor is to preside over the Governor's Council and vote on judicial nominees.
Yes.
What do you bring to that role?
Sure. Well, I see that Chris and I, when we go through the process of appointing judges and to the bench, we're looking for judges that have had a history of following the law and aren't going to be activists on the bench. That's the number one thing we're going to look at. Other than that, it's presiding over that 8-member Governor's Council and working with them to hopefully appoint our judges that we put forward.
Western Massachusetts residents often feel left out by what happens in Eastern Massachusetts at that part of the state. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to make sure that the voice of Western Massachusetts residents are heard and that our local economy grows?
Oh, Chris and I have heard that so often when we've been out here in Western Mass throughout the campaign. We've actually put together a Western Mass plan, which really embodies all of the conversations we've had from business leaders, chambers of commerce, from the workforce to out here in Western Mass. So you can go to chrisforma, kateforlg.com and find that Western Mass plan. And it shows our dedication to each region of the state, and Western Mass in particular. I come from Central Mass, so I know what it feels like that outside of that 495 Beltway, but that is Western Mass will have a seat at the table. And in that plan, the Lieutenant Governor actually plays a big role in that, making sure that I'm a direct contact to the Western Mass towns, and also it shows that I'm out here in Western Mass in person a certain number of times per month.
As a teacher,
that's our commitment.
Yeah. As a teacher, you know that kids just went back to school, and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education just recently raised the score for 10th graders to pass the MCAS exam. Do you support that decision? And what are your thoughts on the use of standardized testing as a graduation requirement?
I do think we need standardized testing as a metric to know that where our kids are at in school and how they're performing. And we have to look at being a teacher. I know that every student comes in learning differently. Some students need a little push to succeed, others need a little extra help. So we need to make sure that our teachers are getting the resources they need, our children are getting the resources they need to succeed in whatever way they need to learn in the classroom.
The MBTA recently had to shut down the Orange Line and part of the Green Line for a month for long needed repairs. What needs to be done to fix the MBTA and for the people of Western Massachusetts who may be worried about the high cost to fix the T?
Sure. You know, the MBTA is one of those issues you didn't see coming on the campaign trail, but Chris and I have been out. We've been riding the T. We've been talking to the riders, talking to the employees, and what the employees have said is that there's a disconnection between them and management. And that's one thing that we want to bring back, to make sure that employees feel engaged, because right now it's so demoralized there. Safety comes first, of course, but we also have to know that these problems can be fixed in the rail yard as well as the boardroom. So it's one thing that we need to do. We need to look to stabilize the MBTA before we can look at expanding it.
Kate Campanelli is a Republican candidate running for Lieutenant Governor. Time goes by so fast.
So fast.
It's nice to have you here, though. We appreciate you coming in.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And after the break, our final guest, Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Leah Cole Allen. You're watching 22 News in Focus.
From your local election headquarters, you're watching the 22 News in Focus Election Special. Once again, here's Rich Teddemer.
Joining us now via Zoom is Leah Cole Allen. She's a Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor, running as Jeff Deal's running mate. Leah, thanks for joining us today.
Very great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I see you were in the State House for 2.5 years, but then you left the State House to focus on your nursing career. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was elected to represent the people of the city of Peabody when I was 24, and then after I spent a few years in the legislature, I felt that I had done my service and my public service, and I went back to the private sector, and I completed my bachelor's degree in nursing, so that I was able to then work at a community hospital near me, and I worked at a community hospital in my area for about 5 years up until the pandemic.
How will that help you in your role as what you want to do as Lieutenant Governor, and why should the voters of Massachusetts choose you as their candidate for Lieutenant Governor?
Well, when I won my election as a state representative, I was talking about things that mattered to the people that I served, and that was keeping taxes low, making sure that our government was responsive to the people that it served, that we were promoting accountability and transparency in government. And then as a nurse who worked on the front lines of the pandemic, my floor where I worked in the hospital was actually the first COVID floor that was designated to treat hospitalized COVID patients. And I served on the front lines even while I was pregnant with my second baby, and there was no vaccine available then. And when I came back from maternity leave, the government mandates dictated that I either needed to consent to being vaccinated or I would lose my job. And I just wasn't comfortable with the lack of safety data and the new technology in these shots. So I decided to opt against it. And because of that, I lost my job. I think a lot of people in the Commonwealth had that same experience. Either they were forced out of their jobs or they were forced to make a healthcare decision that they weren't comfortable with in order to maintain their livelihoods. And that was a total government overreach, in my opinion. And I share people's feelings that that was something totally inappropriate. The government should definitely stay out of your healthcare decisions. So I think I bring to the table both the legislative experience and holding the line on things like taxes and making sure that government is accountable. And then also I bring my medical background, and I'm against the mandates, and I want to make sure that the government is championing people's rights and not forcing them and telling them what to do.
So as Lieutenant Governor, you have a few specific constitutional responsibilities, but you serve kind of whatever role the governor envisions for them. If you're elected, what would you hope to be responsible for as Lieutenant Governor?
Well, the biggest role of the Lieutenant Governor would be to chair the Governor's Council. So I think it's very important that we have diversity of thought on the Governor's Council. Right now it's fully one side, it's totally Democrat. And I think it's important that we have judges who understand our Constitution and have a background that interprets laws correctly and convict criminals and give them a punishment that fits their crime. I think that's huge when it comes to public safety. And I also think that what we saw during the pandemic was that parents with their kids in public schools were pretty disappointed by the fact that they wanted to have some say in kids going back to school and whether or not they had to wear masks and different mandates regarding their kids. And they felt really shut out of that process by our school committees and the education commissioner as well. So I think something that Jeff and I would both champion, and myself as Lieutenant Governor, would be to make sure that parents have a say in what's going on with their kids. We're maintaining our freedoms and making sure that, you know, government is serving the people the best ways that it can.
You said, as you said, you were from Eastern Massachusetts. Of course, Western Massachusetts residents oftentimes felt left out of the economic prosperity that comes from the eastern part of the state. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to make sure that the voices of Western Massachusetts residents are also heard and that our local economy grows?
Definitely. I think that maintaining a presence in Western Mass, making sure that we're making our way out there and maintaining involvement in Western Mass, as well as making sure that we have representation from Western Mass on our boards and commissions, and that the things that are important to Western Mass and the people of that side of the state are really being heard and part of the conversation when we're making decisions affecting the Commonwealth.
You also mentioned education, and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education just recently raised the score for 10th graders to pass the MCAS exam. Do you support that decision, and what are your thoughts on the use of standardized testing as a graduation requirement?
I don't necessarily think that one test, being the MCAS, should dictate whether or not you're able to graduate. And I think teachers and parents and students, they've all kind of been saying the same thing, that, this is something that we've tried. I don't think it's had the intended outcomes that we thought it would. Maybe it's time to look at trying something different so that teachers aren't forced to teach to the test. They can be more creative in what they're teaching the students, and that students aren't judged on just one test. People have different strengths and weaknesses, and I think that if we can look at a different way of judging people on their strengths and weaknesses other than the MCAS, that's something that definitely should be explored.
Excellent. I have one more question for you. You have about a minute to answer. And since you're a nurse, this makes sense. The opioid crisis has taken a toll on our entire state and only gotten worse since the start of the pandemic. As Lieutenant Governor, how would you use your time in office to help those struggling with addiction and reduce deadly overdoses?
That's a great question. And I think, this problem comes from so many different angles. And I think one of the things that we can do is make sure that we have a ballot question coming up in November that would let the people of Massachusetts decide if illegal immigrants should be given driver's licenses. And I think that really speaks to the problem that we have with our border security. I think that if we have open borders, we have people coming here for a better life, of course, but we also can't be naive to the fact that people are coming here trafficking drugs and bringing them into our state and exposing our citizens to that. I think that we need to make sure that families are involved in the conversations, people that have stake in this game, who have family members that are affected by addiction, and we can talk to them and see what their input is, what they have seen has worked or not worked, and make sure that, if the state has resources that we're going to put into different programs, we want to make sure that we're seeing actual results from this. And if things aren't working, then it's time to be creative and keep, moving around until we find something that's starting to help.
Leah Cole Allen, running for Lieutenant Governor. Of course, the primary coming up on Tuesday, September 6th. Leah, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I'll have some final remarks after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You've been watching a special election edition of 22 News in Focus, and we've been talking to the candidates for Governor and Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts. Primary day is Tuesday, September 6th. If you have opted for a mail-in ballot, it must reach your local election office by 8 p.m. on Election Day in order to be counted. We want to thank our guests for joining us, and thank you for watching at home. If you missed any of it, you can still watch it full on our website at wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, have a good day. See ya.
You've been watching the 22 News in Focus election special with candidates for governor and lieutenant governor. Know 22 News is your local election headquarters, your news source throughout election season. 22 News is working for you.